At Christmas dinner, my son raised his glass and said, "To our future without the old man." Everyone laughed. The sound carried across my table, sharp as glass against china. Even Sophie, who usually hides behind her wine, let out a nervous chuckle. My son, Daniel, grinned too wide, his teeth catching the candlelight. His wife reached for his arm as if to quiet him, but he pulled it back and clinked his glass harder. I didn't answer. Silence unsettles people more than any words can. I cut another slice of ham, let the knife scrape the plate, and passed it down the table. The house smelled of pine and cloves, the same way Maria used to make it smell. She had strung the lights herself every year, humming carols under her breath while I wrestled with the ladder. This year the lights burned just as steady, but she wasn't there to see them. Only me and the children she left me with. Daniel cleared his throat, pretending it was just a joke. "Come on, Dad, lighten up. We're just celebrating the next chapter." The next chapter. His chapter, not mine. I watched him refill his own glass with the wine I bought, in the house I paid for, under the roof I patched more times than I care to count. His eyes never met mine for long. They slid away, back to his wife, back to Sophie, anywhere but steady on me. Dinner went on with too much laughter, too much noise. Jokes about retirement communities, about not driving after dark, about how the old man should take it easy. I let them speak. I let them measure themselves against the silence I kept. When dessert came, they left quickly, citing plans with friends, with neighbors, with anyone but me. The wrapping paper they had shoved into a bag lay in the corner. Cheap gifts I didn't need, chosen without thought. When the door closed, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. Only the ticking clock in the hall kept time. The same one Maria had picked out at a yard sale 3 decades ago. I walked into my study and opened the bottom drawer of the desk. Inside was a folder. Thick, heavy, with pages that mattered more than any toast, more than any joke. Contracts, agreements, titles. Daniel thought he understood the future. He thought it waited for him like a dog at the door. But the future doesn't wait. The future belongs to whoever prepares for it. I had prepared. I sat in Maria's old chair and looked at the Christmas tree through the study door. The lights blinked, soft and steady, reflections dancing against the window. For a moment, I heard her humming again. Then the sound was gone, replaced by the memory of Daniel's voice. Without the old man. My hands didn't shake as I pulled the folder closer. I read through the first page, then the second. Each line was a nail, each signature a hammer. Plans set in motion months ago. Quiet plans. Careful plans. The next morning, the bank would call Daniel. And for the first time in his life, he would understand that silence isn't weakness. Silence is preparation. His laughter from last night still echoed in the walls, but it wouldn't last. By tomorrow, that sound would be replaced by something else. Something quieter, sharper. The sound of begging. Morning light slid through the blinds in narrow blades, cutting across the dining table where the empty wine glasses still sat. Wax from the candles had hardened into pale rivulets, like time frozen in place. I cleaned the table slowly, piece by piece, letting the silence stretch. It felt heavier than the laughter from last night, almost as if the house itself remembered. The phone rang at 9:12. The sound startled no one but me, because I was the only one left here to hear it. Caller ID, First National Bank. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mr. Carter?" a steady voice asked. "Yes. This is Mitchell from First National. Just confirming that all account transfers are scheduled as instructed. We'll also be contacting your son, Daniel, this morning, since he's a listed signatory on the joint account he opened with your name last month." I said nothing. The man cleared his throat, misreading my silence. "We'll need him to come by the branch. We noticed unusual activity, and per your directive, all joint authorizations are frozen until verified in person." "I see," I said. My voice didn't betray the satisfaction threading through me. When I hung up, I walked to the study and opened the bottom drawer again. The folder was still there, waiting. Inside it, my plans stretched like quiet blueprints. Daniel had thought he was clever, sliding papers in front of me weeks ago, telling me they were routine authorizations. But nothing gets signed in my house unless I read every word. I had smiled, set the papers aside, and called Bishop that very evening. Bishop told me exactly what to do. Freeze the joint accounts. Flag Daniel's signature. Set every alarm so the bank would call me first. Daniel thought he had trapped me. Instead, he had built the very cage he would soon rattle. By noon, I imagined the call had already reached him. I could see his face in my mind, the same shade of white he used to turn as a boy when the principal caught him cheating on a test. Sophie would panic first, trying to smooth things over, insisting it was a mistake. But Daniel, he would go quiet. And when Daniel goes quiet, he's dangerous, because silence is not natural to him. I boiled water for tea and set Maria's old mug on the counter. Her handwriting still marked the ceramic from where she'd once doodled on it with a Sharpie. Love you, even when you're stubborn. I traced the faded letters with my thumb and let the kettle whistle a little longer than it needed to. The truth was, I had been stubborn. For years, Daniel and Sophie told me to let go, to let them manage things. And for years, I ignored the small signs of what they really wanted. Their impatience at family dinners. Their not-so-subtle remarks about the land, the house, the accounts. Maria used to warn me gently, "They'll come for what you've built when they think you can't guard it anymore." I thought she was exaggerating. But last night, hearing my son raise his glass and toast to a future without me, I knew she had seen them clearer than I ever did. At 3 o'clock, Daniel called. "Dad," he said, voice strained, too controlled. "The bank called me. Some kind of issue. They froze the account. Did you do something?" "I did what was necessary," I said. There was a pause. I could hear Sophie in the background, her voice sharp, urging him to push harder. "Dad," he tried again, lower now. "You don't understand. We need access to that account." "Bills, mortgage?" "Your bills," I corrected. Another pause. His breathing quickened. Why would you do this to me?" I let the silence answer him. Silence was a blade sharper than words. Finally, he snapped, "Fine. We'll talk about this tonight." He hung up before I could reply. I set the phone down, walked back into the dining room, and looked at the empty chairs. The memory of their laughter still hovered faintly in the air, brittle and thin. They thought they had cornered me. They thought age meant blindness. But they had forgotten something Maria always knew. Time sharpens a man who pays attention. Tonight, they would come storming back, demanding answers, demanding explanations. And tonight, for the first time, they would start to realize that the future they toasted didn't belong to them. It belonged to me. By evening, the house had settled into its winter quiet. The tree lights blinked steadily in the corner, casting soft reflections across the window panes. I brewed fresh coffee and waited, knowing they would come. At 6:14, headlights swept across the drive. Doors slammed harder than they needed to. Voices carried through the cold air. Hurried, sharp, rehearsed. Daniel entered first, jaw tight, Sophie trailing behind with her coat still on. "We need to talk," Daniel said, without so much as a greeting. I gestured to the dining table. "Then sit." They didn't. They stood there, shifting, as if the floorboards burned beneath them. Sophie was the first to speak. "Dad, the bank called us. They said you froze the account. What's going on?" I sipped my coffee. "Nothing's going on. I just corrected an error." Daniel slammed his hand on the table. "An error? That account had my name on it. My signature. How could you? Your name doesn't make it yours," I said calmly. He froze, his mouth half open. Sophie tried to smooth it over, her voice too sweet. "Dad, maybe you misunderstood. We only wanted to make things easier for you. We were just trying to help." "By writing yourselves into my accounts? By planning without me?" I asked. Her cheeks reddened. She looked down, fumbling with the strap of her purse. Daniel recovered quickly, his anger pouring back in to replace her shame. "You don't get it," he said. "You're old, you're slipping. Someone has to make sure things don't fall apart." I set the cup down. The porcelain clicked against the saucer, sharp in the silence. Things aren't falling apart. You are. For a moment, no one spoke. The clock in the hall ticked loud enough to cut the air. Sophie's voice trembled. Dad, please. We're family. We're supposed to take care of each other. I leaned forward slightly, enough to make my words carry. Family doesn't toast to a future without its own blood. Family doesn't laugh while the old man sits at his own table. Her eyes widened. Daniel looked away. Their silence told me everything. I stood, slow but steady. Leave. Tonight. We'll talk again when I'm ready. Daniel muttered something under his breath, low and ugly, but he obeyed. Sophie lingered in the doorway, almost turning back, but the weight of my stare sent her after him. The door closed harder than it needed to. I remained in the dining room, listening to the silence they left behind. It was a different silence now, no longer heavy with loss, but sharpened with resolve. I walked into the study, opened the drawer, and touched the folder again. Each page inside was a weapon. Plans, contracts, safeguards. Their laughter last night had been careless. Their confrontation tonight had been desperate. By tomorrow, desperation would turn to fear. I turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of the tree. Its reflection shimmered in the glass, steady and calm. They thought I was too old to fight. They thought silence meant weakness. They were wrong. The morning after their visit, I woke before dawn. The house was cold, quiet in the way only winter makes it. I moved through the rooms slowly, the floorboards groaning under my weight, as if the house itself remembered the confrontation from the night before. In the kitchen, I found the groceries they had left behind weeks ago. Sugar-free pudding cups, crackers without taste, oatmeal in boxes stacked neatly in the pantry. Sophie's idea of care. I picked one up, turned it over in my hands, and placed it back. They hadn't brought food for me. They had brought symbols. Quiet ways of saying I was finished, of marking territory for what would be theirs. I made real breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast, and ate it alone at the table where their voices had mocked me. The smell filled the house, familiar, steady. Maria always said the kitchen was the one place where truth shows itself. The food you prepare for someone tells them what they mean to you. That memory steadied me. After breakfast, I walked to the study. The folder waited in its drawer, just where I'd left it. I pulled it out, flipped through the pages again. Each clause, each signature line, each notarized seal reminded me that the world still ran on paper, not on careless laughter at a Christmas table. Paper spoke louder than toasts. Around noon, I drove to the cemetery. Maria's grave sat beneath a bare oak, its branches reaching like fingers against the sky. I brushed snow from her stone and stood there with my hands in my coat pockets. They laughed at me last night, I said aloud. My voice carried in the cold air, thin but steady. Daniel toasted to a future without me, and they meant it. The wind moved lightly through the branches. I imagined her answer, the way she used to tilt her head and study me when I was stubborn. She had warned me about this, warned me that the children we raised with warmth would one day harden. That greed can slip into bloodlines without notice. I kept the land, I continued. I kept the accounts safe. I listened when Bishop told me to move quiet. Tomorrow the bank will remind Daniel who still holds the ground under his feet. Silence hung around me, but it wasn't empty. It felt like agreement, as if Maria still stood there, unseen but listening. I stayed until my fingers went numb, then drove home. The house felt warmer when I returned, though the heat hadn't changed. I walked straight to the study and wrote a note on my legal pad. Stay silent. Let them reveal themselves. Every move they make digs their own hole. That night, I sat in the living room with the tree lights blinking and thought about Daniel's face when the bank told him no. His mouth tightening, his eyes darting. The way his voice tried to stay calm but cracked at the edges. Fear had finally brushed him, and fear leaves marks deeper than anger. I pictured Sophie too. Her guilt was softer, hidden behind excuses, but it was there. She was still deciding which side to stand on, her own or Daniel's. Either way, she had already shown me the truth. She wanted access. That was enough. The house ticked on. I closed the curtains, locked the doors, and wrote tomorrow's date on my calendar in bold letters. A reminder that the world would turn, contracts would move, and the future would not belong to those who toasted at my expense. Maria was right. Silence wasn't surrender. Silence was sharpening. And tomorrow silence would begin to cut. The next morning began with another call, this time earlier, sharper. The phone rang at 8:03, slicing through the stillness of the house. Caller ID Daniel. I let it buzz until the machine picked up. His voice spilled into the room, urgent and frayed. Dad, answer the phone. The bank won't release the account. They said you flagged it. This doesn't make sense. Call me back. His tone was different now, less anger, more fear. He was starting to realize that the ground under his feet wasn't his to stand on. I poured coffee and sat in the den with the folder open in front of me. 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. Same number, same desperation. I let it go unanswered. Silence teaches more than words ever could. At 9:10, Sophie called. Her voice was softer, careful, as if rehearsed. Dad, we're worried. Daniel's upset. Can we come over today? Just to talk? 6 o'clock, I said, and hung up before she could fill the silence with apologies. I spent the afternoon walking the property. Snow had hardened along the edges of the driveway, crisp beneath my boots. Beyond the warehouse, the land stretched flat and bare, the same land Daniel once called worthless. I stood at the fence line, hands in my pockets, and thought about how quickly value changes. To me, this dirt was memory. To developers, it was profit. To my children, it was inheritance they believed already belonged to them. By late afternoon, I returned inside. The house felt expectant, like it knew company was coming. I set the table with simple plates, nothing more. I wanted no confusion. This wasn't a dinner. This was a reckoning. At 6:07, they arrived together. No cheerful greetings this time, no forced laughter. Just heavy coats and heavier expressions. Daniel started first, pacing before he even sat down. Dad, you've got to fix this. The bank says I don't have access anymore. They're treating me like a stranger. I'm not a stranger. I'm your son. I watched him quietly. His eyes darted, his hands restless. He looked less like a man and more like the boy who once lied about a broken window, thinking silence would protect him. Sophie finally broke in. Dad, please. We don't want to fight. We need stability. You can't carry all this by yourself anymore. What if something happens to you? What then? What then? I repeated. I leaned back, letting the question settle. Then you'll live with the choices you've made. Daniel snapped. We were just trying to secure the future. Do you know what it's like to watch opportunities slip away because you won't act? I acted, I said evenly. I acted when I bought this land. I acted when I worked those years so you could have a roof, an education, a name worth something. And I acted when I protected what you thought you could steal. The room went still. Sophie's face drained of color, and Daniel stopped pacing. You think I don't see? I continued, my voice low. You think I don't hear the toasts, the laughter, the plans you whisper when you believe I'm too tired to notice? I've seen every move, and I've already answered them. Daniel swallowed hard. Sophie looked down, tears threatening but not falling. For the first time, the weight of silence wasn't mine. It was theirs. Finally, I stood and placed the folder on the table between us. Daniel's eyes widened, his hand twitching as if to reach for it. But he stopped when he saw the calm in my face. Tomorrow, I said. You'll understand everything tomorrow. They exchanged a glance, uncertain, shaken. I left them sitting there and walked into the kitchen. Behind me, the folder remained untouched, its presence louder than any words. Tomorrow, the bank would finalize what had already begun. And tomorrow, their begging would truly start. Monday morning came cold and brittle, the kind of winter air that bites through your coat no matter how tightly it's buttoned. I rose early, dressed in my best suit. The dark one Maria had always insisted I keep pressed and ready. She said a man should own at least one suit that made his presence known before he spoke. At 9:30, I drove to Bishop's office. The streets were quiet, Christmas decorations drooping in the cold. When I arrived, Bishop was already waiting, his tie straight, his desk cleared except for a neat stack of papers. "Morning, Mr. Carter," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Are you ready?" I nodded. No need for extra words. The notary was punctual. She spread the documents across the table, her movements precise, professional. Each page carried weight. Contracts, escrow instructions, confirmation of the freeze on joint accounts. She pointed where to sign, where to initial. My pen moved steady across the paper, my name sharp and deliberate. By 10:22 it was done. $15 million set into motion. Money Daniel and Sophie would never touch. The trust was sealed, the safeguards locked. Bishop slid the final copy into a leather folder and handed it to me. "You did well," he said. "Now let them come to you." I thanked him, shook his hand again, and left. The drive home felt different. The same streets I'd driven for years now looked cleaner, straighter. Even the warehouse and the bare land behind it seemed to stand taller. For 4 decades, people had called it worthless. Today, worthless turned into 15 million. Today, silence turned into power. When I pulled into the driveway, the house seemed to wait. I carried the leather folder inside, set it carefully on the study desk, and looked out at the Christmas tree still blinking in the corner of the living room. Maria would have smiled to see it, I thought. She would have hummed one of her carols and teased me about finally proving my stubbornness useful. At 6 o'clock sharp, Daniel and Sophie arrived. No groceries this time, no polite smiles. Just tension that clung to their coats as they stepped inside. Daniel saw the leather folder immediately. His eyes narrowed. "What's that?" "Sit," I said. They obeyed, the way children obey when they sense discipline coming. I placed the folder on the table, opened it slowly, and turned the pages so they could see. "This morning I signed," I said simply. Sophie leaned forward, her breath catching. "Signed what?" "The contract. $15 million. Into a trust you'll never touch." Daniel's face drained of color, his bravado collapsing in an instant. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then tried again. "Dad, you can't just—" "I can," I interrupted. My voice was calm, steady, final. "I did." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "But we're family. Family doesn't toast to a future without its own blood," I said. "Family doesn't laugh at the man who built the table they sit at." The silence that followed was heavier than any laughter they'd given me. Daniel stared at the papers as though they were written in a language he couldn't read. Sophie's hands trembled in her lap. They had expected weakness. They had expected silence to mean surrender. Instead, they found silence forged into steel. I closed the folder, stood, and carried it back to the study. When I returned, they were still seated, still stunned. Their world cracked open. "This house," I said, "is not yours. This land is not yours. My life is not yours to plan. Remember that." Neither spoke. The only sound was the steady tick of Maria's clock in the hall. For the first time, they understood. And for the first time, I saw fear in Daniel's eyes. That night, long after they left, the house stayed heavy with the silence they had carried out the door. I slept soundly for the first time in weeks, not because the war was over, but because the battle line had been drawn so clearly. By morning, Daniel called again. His voice was nothing like before, no arrogance, no anger. It was ragged, raw. "Dad, please, we need to talk. Not about the money, just about us." I listened without answering. Silence stretched across the line until he faltered. "I didn't mean it, what I said at dinner. It was a joke, a stupid joke." Still, I said nothing. Finally, he whispered, "Please call me back," and hung up. Sophie called less than an hour later. Her tone was different from his, softer, rehearsed. "Dad, we made mistakes. We were careless. But you don't have to punish us this way. We're your children. Doesn't that mean something?" I thought of Maria. She would have said it did mean something once, long ago, when children still carried innocence in their faces. But innocence had burned away, replaced by greed disguised as concern. That afternoon, I walked the property again. Snow clung to the edges of the fence, the warehouse standing strong against the pale sky. Each step reminded me of the years I had worked, the sweat I had left in these boards, the hours Maria had waited for me to return home. This land didn't belong to laughter around a Christmas table. It belonged to labor, to memory, to those who respected both. At dusk, they came back without calling first. Their car crunched on the drive, headlights cutting across the front yard. I didn't rush to the door. I let them knock twice before opening. Daniel's eyes were red, his voice softer now. "Dad, please, just listen. We were wrong." Sophie nodded quickly, her hands clasped tight in front of her. "We didn't mean it. We thought you'd already made plans, that you didn't care." I let them into the dining room. The tree still blinked in the corner, its lights reflecting off the leather folder that rested on the table. Their eyes went straight to it. "You think I don't care?" I asked quietly. "I cared enough to build all of this. I cared enough to protect it. And you tried to take it before I was even gone." Daniel sank into a chair, shoulders slumped. "I just wanted security." "You wanted control," I corrected. He didn't argue. His silence was admission. Sophie's tears finally fell, streaking down her cheeks. "Please, Dad, don't shut us out. We're sorry. We can change." I looked at them both, their eyes desperate now, their pride stripped away. For the first time in years, they looked less like adults and more like children again. Children who had lost their footing and didn't know how to stand. But I wasn't fooled. Regret born of fear isn't real. It's temporary, as fragile as the paper they had once tried to trick me into signing. I stood and closed the folder slowly, deliberately. This isn't punishment. This is protection. For me, for Maria's memory, for everything I built. You'll live your lives without stealing mine. Daniel's jaw trembled, but he said nothing. Sophie sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking. The clock in the hall ticked steadily, marking each second of their silence. I let them sit there, broken, until the weight of it pressed them lower in their seats. Finally, I said, "Go home." They rose slowly, like prisoners led from judgment. At the door, Daniel turned once more, his eyes pleading. But I didn't meet them. I closed the door firmly, the latch clicking louder than their voices ever had. For the first time, I felt something close to peace. Not joy, not triumph. Just the steady calm of a man who had seen through the storm and found solid ground beneath his feet. Tomorrow, their begging would grow louder, but my silence would remain stronger. The next morning was gray, heavy clouds pressing low over the town. I woke before the sun, brewed strong coffee, and sat at the kitchen table listening to the house breathe. Every creak, every tick of the clock felt sharper now, as though the walls themselves were aware of the shift inside them. By mid-morning, Bishop called. His tone was brisk but edged with satisfaction. "Everything's finalized. The wire cleared. The trust is live. No one touches it but you, Mr. Carter. Not your children, not anyone." "Good," I said simply. That was all I needed. When I hung up, I thought of Maria again. She would have smiled at Bishop's precision, at his calm authority. She always liked people who spoke little but meant everything. At noon, the phone rang. Daniel again. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail, his words tumbling fast. "Dad, I made a mistake. I know that now. Just please let me come over. We need to figure this out. I'll do whatever you want." I set the phone down, let the message sit unheard in the air. His words had no weight now. They were scraps thrown against a locked door. By evening, they showed up once more, uninvited. The knock was softer this time, almost timid. I opened the door and found Sophie holding a dish of lasagna, the kind Maria used to make. Daniel stood behind her, pale, shoulders slumped. "Please, Dad," Sophie whispered. "Let us in. Just dinner. Just us." I stepped aside. They entered cautiously, as if the air itself might reject them. We ate at the table in silence. The lasagna was warm, rich, but it didn't taste like Maria's. No one's ever could. Halfway through, Daniel set his fork down, his hand trembling. "I didn't mean it," he said quietly. His voice cracked. "That toast. That joke. I was stupid." Sophie nodded quickly, eyes shining with unshed tears. "We laughed because we thought you were strong enough to take it. We didn't realize how cruel it sounded. We didn't realize how much we hurt you." I studied them both. Their words came too easily, too smooth, as if rehearsed. Maybe guilt had sharpened their honesty, or maybe desperation had taught them how to perform it. Either way, I could see the cracks behind their eyes. "You want forgiveness," I said. "But forgiveness isn't currency. It isn't something you earn by showing up with food and apologies." Daniel swallowed hard. "Then tell me what to do. I'll do anything." I leaned back in my chair, the clock's tick filling the silence. "There's nothing you can do. What's done is done. What's mine is protected. What you wanted, you'll never have." The words landed like stones. Sophie looked down at her plate, tears spilling silently now. Daniel's face tightened, then broke. He put his hands to his face, his shoulders shaking once. For a brief second, he wasn't the arrogant man from Christmas dinner. He was a child again, caught in a mistake too big to hide. But I didn't reach for him. I didn't comfort him. That time had passed. When the plates were cleared, I walked them to the door. Sophie lingered, her hand brushing my arm. "We don't want the money, Dad. We just don't want to lose you." Her words might have been true, or they might have been another mask. I didn't answer. I closed the door softly, leaving them standing in the cold. Back inside, the house felt warmer, stronger. The folder sat in the study, sealed and certain. The trust was mine. Their laughter had turned to begging. Their begging had turned to tears. And still my silence held. The following day, snow fell in heavy sheets, blanketing the yard and softening every sound. From my window, the world looked muffled, as though the sky itself wanted silence. I sat in the study with the folder on the desk, the contracts stacked neatly inside. They were more than paper now, they were a wall, a fortress, one my children could never climb. At 10:47, the phone rang again. This time it was Sophie. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the strain behind it. "Dad, Daniel's not doing well. He hasn't slept. He feels like you've abandoned him." I let her words hang before answering. "He abandoned himself." "Please," she whispered, "can we come over one more time? We just want to talk. No fighting, no money, no contracts. Just talk." I agreed to 6 o'clock, knowing they wouldn't keep their promise. The day moved slowly. I shoveled the walk, brewed more coffee, reread the notes I'd written in my hand on yellow paper. Stay silent. Let them reveal themselves. Each line felt sharper now, more like scripture than reminder. When 6 came, they arrived with no food this time, no smiles, no attempts at pretense. Just pale faces and tight shoulders. Daniel looked thinner than he had days ago, his eyes shadowed, his jaw clenched. He didn't sit. He stood by the table, fists balled. "Dad, this isn't fair." "What isn't fair?" I asked quietly. "You've locked us out of everything. Out of the accounts, the land, the house, out of your life. We're your children. Doesn't that mean anything?" I studied him carefully. "It means enough that I raised you. It means enough that I gave you everything you needed to build your own lives. But it doesn't mean you get to take mine." His face twisted, anger burning under his skin. Sophie touched his arm, tried to steady him. "Dad, please. We don't want your money. We just want to be trusted again." I leaned back, hands folded on the table. Trust isn't something you demand when it's convenient. Trust is earned. And you broke it the moment you toasted to a future without me. The words struck like a blow. Sophie flinched. Daniel exhaled hard, pacing the room like a caged animal. Finally, he stopped and slammed his palm on the table. "You can't take it all with you, Dad. One day you'll be gone. And when you are, when I am," I interrupted, "it will already be decided. Every page is signed, every seal stamped. You'll inherit nothing you didn't earn." The silence that followed was jagged, tense. Daniel's lips pressed thin, his eyes hard. Sophie's tears slid down her cheeks again, but she didn't speak. I stood slowly, steady on my feet. You came here tonight hoping I'd break, hoping fear or guilt would make me undo what I've done. But you forget, I've lived longer than both of you combined. I know the value of patience, and I know the weight of silence. They stared at me, lost, cornered. For once, their eyes didn't hold calculation. They held defeat. Go home, I said quietly. There's nothing left to discuss. Daniel opened his mouth as if to argue, but Sophie pulled him toward the door. He resisted for a moment, then followed, shoulders tight, rage simmering beneath his exhaustion. When the door closed behind them, the house felt stronger than ever. Snow piled against the windows, softening the world outside. But inside, everything was sharp, clear. They had tried anger. They had tried guilt. They had tried tears. All of it fell against the wall I had built in silence. Tomorrow would be the last day. Tomorrow their fight would end. The morning came clear and cold, the snow from the night before sparkling in the early sun. I stood at the window with coffee in hand, the leather folder still on the desk behind me, its weight undeniable even when untouched. Today was the day everything settled. At 9:02, the phone rang. Not Daniel. Not Sophie. The bank. Mr. Carter, the voice said, steady, professional. All accounts are fully transitioned. The trust is complete, disbursements locked as instructed. Your children's access has been permanently revoked. If they attempt to challenge it, they'll be referred to our legal department. I thanked him and hung up. The sound of the receiver falling into place echoed through the room like a gavel. Final. Irreversible. I sat in Maria's old chair and let the silence settle. I could almost hear her voice, low and knowing. They'll come running when they realize it's real. At 11:15, the knock came. Harder this time. Urgent. I opened the door to find Daniel and Sophie standing there, pale, shaken, their eyes wide with the fear of people who suddenly see their future slipping through their fingers. Dad, Daniel said, his voice rough, desperate. We need to talk. Right now. I stepped aside. They entered quickly, moving toward the dining room as if the walls themselves were closing in on them. Daniel didn't sit. He paced, ran his hands through his hair, his voice breaking as he spoke. The bank told me everything. The trust, the accounts, all of it locked down. You can't do this. You can't just cut us out. I already did, I said calmly. He stopped, stared at me, eyes burning. We're your children. Yes, I said. And that used to mean something. Sophie finally sat down, her hands trembling in her lap. Dad, please, we're begging you. Undo this. Just give us another chance. We'll take care of you. We'll make it right. I studied her face, streaked with tears, and Daniel's, twisted with panic. Their desperation filled the room like smoke, choking, heavy. Once, long ago, I might have reached across the table, might have tried to comfort them. But that was before Christmas dinner, before the toast, before they showed me exactly how little I meant to them when they thought the future was already theirs. You gave me nothing, I said, my voice steady. On my birthday, on Christmas, in the years since your mother passed. Nothing but impatience, jokes, and plans that didn't include me. And now you beg because the money is gone. Daniel slammed his fist onto the table, his face white, his lips trembling. We didn't mean it. It was a joke. It wasn't a joke, I said quietly. It was truth. Truth spoken over wine and laughter, thinking I was too old to matter. You raised your glass to a future without me. Well, that future has arrived. And you're not part of mine. Sophie sobbed openly now, burying her face in her hands. Daniel sank into the chair beside her, his anger spent. His body slumped like a boy caught in a storm too strong to fight. I stood, walked to the study, and returned with the leather folder. I placed it on the table, opened it to the first page, and let them see the bold black ink of my signature. $15 million, I said. Protected, sealed, locked away from you forever. I will live my life with it, use it as I choose. And when I'm gone, it will not fall into your hands. Daniel's face drained completely, his eyes wide, his lips parted in disbelief. Sophie reached for the folder as if to touch it, but I closed it sharply, the sound echoing through the room. Beg all you want, I said. But you gave me nothing. Now I give you the same. The words hung in the air, heavier than the silence that followed. They sat there broken, pale, unable to speak. I walked to the door, opened it wide, and waited. Slowly, they rose, their eyes hollow, their shoulders bent under the weight of what they had lost. Daniel stopped once at the threshold, his lips trembling, but no words came. Sophie's tears froze in the cold as they stepped into the snow. I closed the door behind them, the latch clicking into place. For a long while, I stood in the quiet, listening to the house breathe around me. The clock ticked, steady and certain. The tree lights blinked softly in the corner. And for the first time in years, I felt the deep calm of a man who had endured, who had prepared, who had answered cruelty with silence and deceit with steel. Maria had been right. They came running when they realized it was real. And now, at last, they understood the cost of their laughter.